Welcome back to another video. Today's topic is the Antichrist. John MacArthur explained how Satan is using the church to do his work for him. So let's watch the video together.
2 Thessalonians chapter 2. We've been dealing here with the coming man of lawlessness, the coming man of sin, the Antichrist. When I was in Indiana this week on Monday night, we arrived for a great meeting that night. And as I pulled up to the church, there was a large crowd of cars in the parking lot, and many people were moving toward the auditorium. And I was watching them, and then I noticed out of the corner of my eye, some people were picketing the church. They had sticks with big placards on them. I noticed the first one in line said, "Jesus does not forgive sin." And then there were a number of other such things that were basically denials of the work and person of Christ in one way or another. It's a bit unusual to have a church picketed by people who are so bold and brash as to demonstrate the Antichrist spirit right in the very place where Christ is exalted. But certainly it is the brashness of the enemy himself to do that. That is the Antichrist spirit which is already at work in the world. It's the mystery of lawlessness that is already at work. Ultimately, it culminates in the final Antichrist. But there are many who today demonstrate the attitude of Antichrist. There is a powerful, supernaturally energized Antichrist attitude that pervades the world. It is part of Satan's attack. On Christ. You see, the plan of Satan is to keep the world from accepting Christ and his work, to keep the world sufficiently deceived so that they are not saved, and then ultimately to bring his own false Christ, the culmination of all the Antichrist attitude, namely the man of sin, the son of perdition, and thus bring about the ultimate and final deception. We're learning about this man and his career in this chapter. Satan, we know, is a liar and a deceiver and the father of lies. He disguises himself as an angel of light, and his emissaries are equally disguised in the same way. They, like him, are deceitful workers, and their primary deception is to lie about Christ. That is why, inevitably, false religions have an errant Christology. False religions tell lies about Christ. In 2 John, verse 7, it says, "Many deceivers have gone out into the world, those who do not acknowledge Jesus Christ as coming in the flesh." This is the deceiver and the Antichrist. So he tells you right there, the Antichrist attitude is a denial of Jesus Christ as God in human flesh. And so again, I say, inevitably, false religious systems always attack the person and the work of Christ. All of them, all false religions, hold to a salvation by works or ceremony or ritual or effort, and that denies the work of Christ, who alone can save. And all of them have a skewed view of Christ. To some he is an angel, to some he is some kind of an elevated emanation. To others, he is a glorious man, and so on and so on. To some, he is a prophet of God. Always, the Antichrist spirit attacks the reality of Christ and his work. Finally, and ultimately, that attitude will find its form in Antichrist, the final great satanic religious leader of the world. When he comes, he will be the consummate enemy of Christ. He will be the greatest deceiver the world has yet experienced, the greatest human deceiver, who will lead the whole world to worship him and not the true Christ. In fact, just by way of reminder, look for a moment at Revelation chapter 13. Revelation chapter 13 and verse 4, it mentions him, calling him the beast. And of the beast, it says in verse 5, there was given to him a mouth speaking arrogant words and blasphemies, and authority to act for 42 months was given to him. He has a 42-month or a 3.5-year career. It was given to him, verse 7, to make war with the saints and overcome them, and authority over every tribe and people and tongue and nation was given to him. So he literally rules the whole world. He is a powerful, powerful figure. Verse 8 says, and here's the key, all who dwell on the earth will worship him. He literally gains the worship of the whole world. All of those whose name has not been written from the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who has been slain. Anybody who's not a believer, anybody who is not in Christ will worship this ultimate Antichrist. Further into the chapter, it tells that he will, by the enabling of Satan and through the instrumentation of the false prophet who is his henchman, perform all kinds of deceptive signs, and those deceptive signs, of course, will increase his attractiveness and be the reason why the whole world falls down to worship him. And eventually he controls everybody. Verse 16, small and great, rich and poor, free and slaves, they all bear his mark on their right hand or on their forehead, and they are all a part of his operation. This Antichrist then literally captures the world. He becomes a religious and political leader that people really worship as God. He starts his career, according to Daniel 9 and Matthew 24, he starts his career by going into the temple in Jerusalem, and there he desecrates the Holy of Holies, the altar, and then sets himself up as God, demands the whole world to worship him, and they do, because they are all given over to deception by God because they have rejected Christ. So the final Antichrist is a man, a human being, energized by Satan, equipped to do some astounding things. He pulls off the ultimate blasphemy in the temple of God, sets himself up as God. The whole world worships him, and he sucks the whole world to himself, and therefore God judges them. It is the day of the Lord, you remember, that great judgment that comes to destroy Antichrist and with him the false prophet and all who followed him and cast them into the lake of fire forever and forever. So the Antichrist is an important personality in redemptive history. Now, why is Paul writing about the Antichrist to these Thessalonians? Well, because they were confused. When he was with them, he taught them about the return of Christ. He taught them they had nothing to fear. He taught them that Jesus would come and rapture them and take them out. And then there would come the day of the Lord judgment. But they wouldn't be in the day of the Lord judgment. They wouldn't experience that judgment. Somehow, however, they had come to think that perhaps they were already in the day of the Lord and somehow had missed the rapture. What would make them think that? Persecution, hostility toward them, difficulty. But more than that, verse 2, somebody came along with a message and a false letter, supposedly written by Paul, and saying that there had come a supernatural spiritual word from God, and Paul was preaching it and penning it, and it was saying that the day of the Lord has come, end of verse 2. And you're in it. And panic set in. And they were shaken and disturbed. Why? Because the day of the Lord was a day of devastating worldwide judgment and damnation. And they didn't believe they were supposed to be in that. And so the question would be, what happened to the rapture? Why weren't we taken out? Why weren't we rescued? What's going on here? And they were in a state of fear and doubt. And so Paul writes to them with regard to the coming of the Lord and our gathering together to him, namely the rapture. And what he says to them is this: you couldn't have missed the rapture. You couldn't be in the day of the Lord. Why? Because Antichrist hasn't come. And Antichrist has to come before the day of the Lord breaks loose. And Antichrist hasn't come. So how could you be in the day of the Lord? So he uses that event of the coming of Antichrist, which is a precursor to the day of the Lord, as a way to show them the day of the Lord hasn't come. Because it was obvious the Antichrist hadn't come. The abomination of desolations called the apostasy in verse 3 hadn't taken place. The whole world certainly wasn't worshiping him. That had not happened yet. And so the reason he moves into this discussion of Antichrist is to show them that they cannot be in the day of the Lord, to give them hope and encouragement that they will escape all of this stuff when the Lord does rapture them, and they can still hope for that event to come.